Remember back in July when the Oilers were the winners of free agency? Well, yeah, we spoke too soon. You see, Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson got $7 million combined to become Leon Draisaitl's best ever wingers. The consequence to those free agency steals were the Oilers couldn't match the $2 million deal St. Louis gave to Dylan Holloway, who, by the way, has more goals and points than the other two guys combined. But it's okay, Edmonton can just trade him, right? Wrong. Jeff Jackson gave them and Adam Henrique all some form of no-trade clauses. I would argue that the Oilers have 5 forwards playing a level below what they're getting paid: Skinner, Arvidsson, Henrique, Kane, and Janmark. But all 5 of these guys have some form of trade protection. So, if the Oilers want to move out money to bring in a goaltender, elite top 6 forward, or top 4 defenseman to play with Nurse, they're going to have to convince one of these veterans to leave a legitimate cup contender for a Chicago or San Jose. Now, don't get me wrong, the Oilers don't even necessarily need to make a move. I mean, they're already a serious contender as is, but while Florida's bringing in Seth Jones and who knows what else, Edmonton is kinda stuck. It feels like for the entirety of McDavid and Draisaitl's careers, they have been hampered by at least one bonehead move per season. And don't get me wrong, there have been some fantastic ads in between, but imagine the success these guys could have had with a Bill Zito or Jim Nill calling the shots. The Oilers aren't in trouble. They're probably still Cup favorites, but the Jeff Jackson, Stan Bowman era isn't exactly off to a fantastic start. With that, welcome into Top Shelf, brought to you by Skyscanner. I'm Aidan Thakkar with my guys, John Matisz, Kyle Cushman making his return to the show.
Off the IR.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought you were going to have to toss me on LTIR there for a minute.
And of course, Levi Smith as well, as always. And guys, the Oilers are a hot topic right now because it feels like they should always be going all in with a core with McDavid and Draisaitl, and the deadline's coming up, and everyone's like, oh, they should get Gibson, they should do this, they should do that. Well, it comes out now that basically all these middle 6 players they have no trade protection. And John, we were talking about this before the show. It seems like everybody around the league has just been doing this, like so many players in the league. Any guy who's signing a UFA deal at this point seems to have trade protection. But Levi, if you were one of these guys, if you were Victor Arvidsson or Jeff Skinner, who's never played a playoff game, 1,000 games into his career, would you waive your no trade protection to go to a non-playoff team?
No, I wouldn't. I don't think that those guys, they don't owe it to the Oilers, especially a guy like Skinner or Arvidsson who just got there. Like, at least, like, if I'm those guys, I'm like, okay, I don't want to waive this period, but if I'm going to at any point, at least let me get through the season and see it through one time. Like, you're playing with 2 of the best players in the game, and none of these guys have won cups. These guys are all kind of on the back half of their career, so they're not chasing bags anymore. They just want to win Stanley Cups. So, yeah, absolutely not. Like, I don't think that a guy like maybe Victor Arvidsson has a couple more years left in the tank, but a Jeff Skinner, if that guy goes to the Blackhawks or goes to a bottom feeder, like he might never get to the playoffs. First of all,
that's a career over. Right
exactly,
there,
yeah,
like,
that's
completely.
the end of it. So no, I don't like. At the end of the day, the Oilers brought them in, and the Oilers, those guys don't owe the Oilers anything. So I would see it through if I'm those guys.
Well, in Arvidsson, I mean, the guy went through 3 surgeries. Like, he battled his way back. It looked kind of dicey there in terms of his future. He's on a good team. He's not quite contributing to the level that everyone would hope, but that's not, the no trade clause thing is not his problem. He negotiated it.
They
it's
put
the
it in
Oilers'
the deal
problem.
for a reason, and that's why I'm sure Arvidsson wanted that. He's like, I've dealt with uncertainty the past few years. I just want certainty.
Yes.
I want to be somewhere for 24 months. That's all I'm asking. And the Oilers are in a spot where they banked on these veterans being better than the prospects were, or the younger guys were in the playoff run last year. Well, the younger guys weren't exactly, I don't know, they weren't fantastic in the playoff run last year, but they've been fantastic this season, both Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg. And you got to think that they're kicking themselves right now that they didn't keep them, eh?
When you look at what the Oilers need, it's a speedy winger, Dylan Holloway, and a defenseman that can play both sides and eat some minutes, Philip Broberg. So it is funny to look back where a lot of us kind of agreed where the veterans made a lot of sense jumping into the Oilers lineup, but it hasn't played out that way. And it's now a tricky situation where the Oilers have a bunch of holes to fill because guys have been underperforming and don't have a lot of flexibility. So unless you can find a way to get maybe one of those veterans to a contender some way, free up some cap space there, and then make a separate move to fill that hole, It's a very tricky situation for the Oilers staff right now.
It's funny to me because I feel like the two teams that like everyone was like, oh, they hate each other now are the Oilers and the Blues. And the Oilers would love to have a Dylan Holloway, Philip Broberg, and a Jordan Bennington on their roster right now.
When
Like
you put
those,
it that
everyone's
way.
like, oh, Bennington there. It's like there's a kind of an ugly relationship right there. But regardless, the Oilers are still fantastic. I think you can say that even if they don't make an addition, I still think they're the best team in the Western Conference by.
They have that high end gear.
Yeah, they
Draisaitl's
do.
best season. I mean,
Yeah, and McDavid's like worst season, even though he's still like top 5 in scoring. And I don't know, he just walked the Jacob Slavin the other night. The
That
Oilers,
clip was insane.
Oh gosh, like we're talking about the best defensive defenseman in the league, and just got absolutely.
4 Nations payback.
Oh, come on.
That's what that was.
But if you're headed to Edmonton this spring to check on what could be another dramatic playoff run, well, Skyscanner can help make your travel easier and cheaper. Link in bio and description for those top shelf deals. So I want to stay on the topic of trades and the deadline and stuff like that, but I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of names right now. I just want to get into the idea, John, of like, why does it feel like there hasn't been a lot? Yes, there was the JT Miller trade, there was the Seth Jones trade, and like the Granlund trade. I guess maybe I'm talking myself into that. There has been a bunch of stuff, but it feels like all the big deals are behind us, and there's not a whole lot of guys still out there. Do you feel like there's been less this year? Do you feel like there's more to come?
I think there's been, less quantity, but the quality's been there. I mean, Mikko Rantanen moved already.
Yeah,
You mentioned Jones, Granlund, JT Miller, even a guy like Joel Farabee, he's an impact player. Nyquist just moved. These are important players to cup contending teams. So the quality's been there, but the thing that's holding up the market is like, who are the sellers? Who are the sellers in this market, right? You've got, San Jose. Well, they've already dealt. Probably Granlund is their top piece to deal. So what happens between now and the deadline with San Jose? I don't know. Pittsburgh, we're kind of waiting. Okay, Ricard Raquel, Erik Karlsson. There could be some fireworks there. Chicago, they move Jones. Okay, Donato, Connor Murphy. So there's something there. But then from there, is Nashville ready to pull the plug on all their free agent signings? Probably not, if I were to guess. You've got teams like the Kraken. I mean, they're so conservative. They're out of the playoffs, but are we for sure that they're going to actually pull the trigger on, I don't know, trading like a Jared McCann or something? So there's a lot of teams that are sort of in this weird spot where they're right sort of around the playoff cut line, but aren't quite at the race, and they haven't quite made their players available yet. So like, even if you look at the West, I mean, you've got the Blues, for example. I think they're a perfect example of they might make the playoffs, even though they're not necessarily trying to go 100% all in on this group. And a lot of their players, they don't have to trade. Braden Shen, he's got a few more years. Like, they don't have to trade him. There's no, consequence to going into next year with him. So it's just a bit of a weird market, I would say. That's probably the word I would use is compared to other years where you've got a real defined, buyers and sellers. I feel like you've got a lot of buyers right now, but very limited sellers.
We've been talking about it all year. Like, there's 7 teams in the Eastern Conference playoff race. In the Western Conference playoff race, it seems like nobody wants that last wild card spot. I mean, it seems like Calgary wants it, but they can't score goals. It seems like Vancouver wants it, but they can't get out of their own way in terms of their issues. But then Utah's in the race, and St. Louis is in the race. And, I mean, Seattle's not that far out of it, and Anaheim's not that far out of it. So it's actually a whole lot of teams that are like, oh, you know what, maybe this is a playoff spot you can get into in the West with 90 points. It doesn't have to be 95. And if you get that, then the list of sellers comes down. On the topic of sellers, though, Kyle, the prospect class looking upcoming is interesting. There's some really good players, but there's no Gavin McKenna like there is in 2026 or Landon DuPont in 2027. I think Matthew Schaefer sounds like he's going to be a pretty good player. Michael Misa, all these guys are good. But as a seller, would you prefer a pick in 2025 or one a year out from now in 2026?
So I think the important distinction here is the picks that you're realistically getting when you're a seller at the trade deadline. You're not getting a top 10 pick, probably not even getting a top 15 pick in most circumstances. You're looking at late teens ideally, but probably into the 20s. And I think that's where the conversation comes in for 25 versus 26, where if I'm a seller, I'd rather have the pick sooner rather than later. So for me, the 26 class at the top looks more exciting, but the 25 pick is what I would want right now.
Yeah, especially if you do get into later, because it's no guarantee you're going to hit on a Wyatt Johnston or a David Pastrnak, like one of these guys in the 20s that can make the jump pretty quickly. Obviously, these guys taken later in the first round, it's been starting to take these prospects again, like 2 or 3, 4 years sometimes to even make that jump. Where if you get that pick in the top 10, I mean, like Gavin McKenna will be ready to play on a team and be your first line center the second he comes into the league. Maybe not the same story for the top end of the 2025 draft. I want to do a little quick exercise here, a little fill in the blank. We'll start with Levi, still sticking on this trade deadline topic, and we're going to go with blank will be crowned the trade deadline winner. So, Levi,
Okay.
you have some information to go off already, of course, but who's your trade deadline winner?
Yeah, I think, honestly, it's a team that has made a move already. We just saw they made a big splash this last weekend. I think it's going to be the Panthers. And I say that in part because I do like the Seth Jones deal a lot. I think anytime, just the way that my head works, you trade a goalie who's not playing for a guy who's coming in the lineup and playing, it just like on paper, and especially when you get into the Stanley Cup playoffs, Spencer Knight's not playing any games. Seth Jones is a huge addition to that back end and fills in for what Brandon Montour did last year perfectly. So I think that is a plus for them. But I also think what happened just after that Seth Jones move is really what opens the floodgates for the Panthers. Matthew Tkachuk, long-term injury reserve. So they freed up almost $9 million worth of cap space after bringing in Seth Jones. So they've got a lot more money to play with. And obviously we know that they're a team who is super content being in win now mode and is going to make win now moves. So with all the money that they still have left over with that fun little loophole that the Vegas Golden Knights used to do so much with Mark Stone and stuff, I think definitely be on the lookout for the Panthers to make another big splash.
Well, it looks like Vegas, Florida, Dallas, all three of these teams are going to have some serious money to work with considering their injury situations. And that's why it's an Edmonton, we talked about earlier in the show, puts themselves in such a harder spot because they're going to have to be way more creative on the money front to bring in an impact player. Would you guys agree with this Florida idea?
I mean, we got to watch out for Vegas. Like, this is a team that never sits on their hands, like always makes a splash, the evil empire of the NHL. And they need some help on the wings. And I wonder if, like, Brock Besser becomes available, if they're able to pry him out of Vancouver. You know, we were talking about teams that are on the fence of selling. What about the Islanders? Kyle Palmieri, does he end up on Vegas? Ricard Raquel again to bring up him for Pittsburgh. Like, let's be honest here. Like, the Golden Knights are doing something. Tomas Hertl last year came out of nowhere.
Thomas Hertl, Noah Hannafin, just a little casual
Yeah,
deadline
just
for the Golden
they
Knights,
just
so.
figure out a way to make a splash. It's in their DNA. So I would just, watch out for that inevitable Vegas splash.
So one team, obviously, everyone wants to know what they're going to do, the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'll give this one to you, Kyle. Fill in the blanks here. The Leafs will make blank trades before the deadline. How many do they make?
I think they got 3 in them, where we always see them do one minor move, so that'll count as one. And then I think they got 2 in them, where they'll address some defensive depth, but I think they really got to go out and get a third-line center and get another center option in there. So it's a team that we don't really know what they're going to do yet because they kind of maybe already made a move getting Yarncroke back off of LTIR. But I think they got 3 in them this season. You look at last season where they made 4 moves. Cade Weber was one of those, so really 3 roster moves. I think we'll see a little bit less activity this year, but maybe go for a bit more impact at the forward position.
Do you think if they do make an impact move, one of Easton Cowan, Fraser Minton, or Ben Danford, is that the guy? One of those 3.
Yeah.
Do you think one of those 3 will be a part of a different organization come next weekend?
I don't think so, just because we so rarely see each team's top prospects actually move at the deadline. It feels like every year we talk about the top prospects and them potentially moving, then none of them really end up actually moving. And you even look back to like Jake Gensel being traded, and Carolina didn't give up any of their top prospects. Obviously, it was more of a volume trade there, and the Leafs maybe don't have the same volume. But you look to a second tier or draft picks and some things like that, and I think there's ways that the Maple Leafs can make an impact addition at forward, get a third-line center, or maybe get somebody that might be a little more undervalued, like a Yanni Gourde, because he's been injured, and maybe that price comes down. Some things like that where maybe they can get a bit more creative, where they don't have to ship out any of those top-end guys. Because really, I don't see them trading any of those guys you mentioned there. Cowan, a first-round pick. Danford, a first-round pick. Minton, an early second-round pick. All guys that the Leafs really covet for obvious reasons, for guys that are rentals. You've got to, if you're moving that caliber of prospect, you've got to get somebody with some term. and I'm not certain where that comes from in this current trade market, unless something like a Seattle Kraken decide to move some of those guys with term. Maybe something that like that comes available. But at this point in time, I think the Leafs are probably much more conservative in the trade market and deal a draft pick, deal from like the second tier of their prospect cupboard. But I'd be surprised if any of those top end prospects actually end up moving.
Now, should they be conservative? Like, you're kind of playing it
Yep.
out like what they'll probably be like or what will probably happen. But like, if you're Brad Treliving, are you more aggressive than perhaps he will be?
Everything is for the right price, right?
Sure.
Where am I trading a Easton Cowan or whoever just to get a Brock Nelson because he's the top guy available? Probably not. Where I don't think the value that you're getting there makes sense, where I think you could pull that trade off if you're using some other pieces. So for me, if the right player is available, absolutely, all those players are on the table. Like, none of those players are untouchable prospects, where Easton Cowan looks like he's going to be a good player, probably a top 9 guy, complementary piece in the top 6. Same kind of goes for Fraser Minton, probably even less, probably just like a third liner, Ben Danford. He's an intriguing guy just because of the defensive makeup, and it's something that the Leafs don't have in the cupboards. But when you look at all those players, they're not untouchables, but it's got to be for the right player, and it's absolutely for term. So if somebody like Jared McCann, for example, comes available, or some other players like that come available, then I'm much more inclined to pick up the phone and talk about some of those prospects. But for pure rentals, the Brock Nelson types, the guys that are going to free agency and won't be re-signing with Toronto or something like that, it's the picks and second-tier prospects for me.
It was Jared McCann was who Dubas gave
You
up
bet.
pay to keep Kerfoot.
Philip
Expansion
Hallander in a
draft
7th,
wonder.
and then they unprotected.
And then let's give all our
Kerfoot,
best assets for him. That would be a.
But yeah, he's got.
protected Justin Hall there.
Yes.
So
Okay.
If you
Don't
take
forget
all that
goodness.
away, like the baggage, like he's got $5 million this year and next. He can play
That's
center and the wing.
yeah.
With
Like,
cap
he's
going
valuable.
Up, like, yeah, it's and I don't know. Like, Brad Treliving is notorious for, he would always say in Calgary that he builds his team in the summers. He doesn't like going out and doing a big thing at the deadline. He was really close to bringing Mark Stone at the deadline years before, and
Juuso Valimaki.
it was Valimaki, a
Yeah.
second round pick, and I don't know, some roster players like that would have been a good trade. But so I think, I don't know, with the uncertainty of Marner, like, I think Toronto has to go all in.
That's
Like,
an important wild card
like,
dimension.
Like, it's with the uncertainty there, like, you, especially a guy that maybe has a couple years in him too, like a Braden Shen or a Jared McCann, someone that you could have for the foreseeable future too, that you can kind of start to build into your next sort of tier of this core, even if it is a little bit older, I think would be an important get for the Leafs, and I think they can't be afraid to do that.
Yeah, and the East is fairly wide open, so I think this is a time to be a little reckless if you're the Leafs, and
sure.
the timeline of like Matthews and Marner aren't getting any younger here. Like
That's
they're
true.
in their
Reckless is a scary word to throw.
Yeah,
there,
that might be a little extreme, but like
But
bold,
I know what
to
you
be
mean, though,
bold,
like,
to be
absolutely.
aggressive. Yeah,
like what bold moves?
What are we
that the
waiting
Leafs
for?
made? Like, you go back to the Ryan O'Reilly trade. That was a bold move that they made, and
Yeah.
they won a round there. And obviously, things didn't work out in the second round. But last year was a pretty underwhelming trade deadline, all things considered. Ilya Lyubushkin, Joel Edmondson, Connor Dewar. None of those guys really moved the needle all that much.
That is a Brad Treliving deadline though, and that's what
And
I'm
it feels
saying.
like that's the way that we're going right now, unless you can get some kind of third line center that really kind of moves the needle for the depth of the lineup.
So as usual, Leaf fans are planning the parade before the playoffs have even kicked off. So if you want to book your trip to Toronto to be here in case this actually is the year, use Skyscanner to find the best deals possible. Link in bio and description to score 'em. Okay, my favorite part of the show, watching it back last week, was the NHL Inbox, John. Getting those questions is funny. There's
Love it.
some good stuff in there. I know you had opened up the inbox again this week. What did you have in it this time around?
yeah. I got to pull up my phone so I can actually read the questions. I got some optical issues reading a monitor here, but yeah, let's get into the first one. So it's about rebuilding and just comparing the different teams and the different GMs. And so the question is, which GM is having more success with the rebuild? You've got Mike Greer in San Jose, Kyle Davidson in Chicago, and Kent Hughes in Montreal. I mean, let's go from 3 to 1. I think that Kyle Davidson, I don't think that his rebuild has been irresponsible or a failure or anything like that, but there's just so much in the air. Like, he's really betting on drafting and developing. He's emptying everything out of the NHL roster. He's, getting very few young NHLers back. It's a lot of first-round picks, which, is not a bad strategy, but he's really hoping his scouts strike gold here. And so far, honestly, they haven't really done that. And we'll see how their prospects develop. But hasn't looked great so far. And the danger with what he's doing is that this could turn into the Buffalo Sabres, right? Where next thing you know, a couple of years down the line, does Connor Bedard want out because he's sick of losing like a Jack Eichel was? And so again, I don't think like this is more of like a ranking that puts him in the third spot because I like the other ones better versus him doing like a horrible job. But I think it's pretty notable that Kyle Davidson's gone all in on the prospects and just a real slow rebuild here. So if we go to number 2, I think Mike Grier has done a pretty good job in San Jose. The former GM left them with some really bad contracts. Erik Karlsson, Tomas Hertl, and Brent Burns. He's turned those into a ton of picks and prospects. And, even the Karlsson one, he gets a first in the original trade and also Mikael Granlund. Well, he trades Mikael Granlund, so he gets a second first. So technically from Erik Karlsson, he got 2 firsts. I mean, that alone is pretty substantial. And what I've liked about what Grier's done is that he's gotten creative. Barclay Goodrow goes on waivers. Okay, we should pick that guy up. I mean, he's a veteran. He's overpaid, but we don't care. We need some sort of, cultural guy, someone who's an NHLer in our lineup every night. And, Ty Dellandrea, Jake Wallman. He's made a bunch of trades that, like, these guys might not be around when San Jose is good, but at least it's keeping the floor a lot higher than Chicago. Like, the tank is certainly over, and I like that for Macklin Celebrini and Will Smith and the environment that they're playing in. So I like what he's done so far. But number 1, Kent Hughes, like, I've talked about us on this show before. Like, I feel like the Canadiens are performing a near perfect rebuild here. The only blemish on their resume is that they passed on Michkov and took Reinbacher, but they remedied that with taking Demidov the next year. They said, okay, we passed on the Russian the first time. We're not going to do it the second time. Demidov looks like the superstar that they need. And I just like the way that he's, hired Martin St. Louis. Looks fantastic as a sort of 1-2 punch between GM and coach. And obviously the president, Jeff Gorton's done a good job too. I like the infrastructure there. I like that they're taking it slow, but also not being as conservative as, say, Kyle Davidson and Chicago. And it's a lot of 2 steps forward, 1 step back in terms of, what's going on the ice, in terms of, development within their NHL roster. And I just think that they're building a sustainable winner that's going to be built around Slavkovsky, around Caulfield, around Suzuki and Demidov and some defensemen. And they're just building towards, I think, something special. Like, if we're projecting out, say, 5 years from now, I'm pretty confident that the Canadiens will be a cup contender, or at least like a really feisty top 10 team. Whereas the Sharks, I mean, maybe Chicago, I don't know how that's going to turn out. All these GMs were hired within like 8 months of each other. So, and obviously you're given like different circumstances, but I really like the trajectory that Montreal's on. And yeah, I wonder what you guys think though. Like,
I feel like Montreal definitely had the best starting point
Yes.
because they had stuff already in their organization when they started the rebuild. Like, obviously Suzuki and Caulfield were there before they had their first overall pick, but they also didn't get a Bedard or Celebrini with their first overall pick.
Right.
I would say Slavkovsky is definitely a full tier below those 2 guys when you're projecting him out for his career. So different circumstances, I think, have to be considered. I like what San Jose is doing. I think they're building a culture. I think they're being smart with their assets. I don't know what Chicago is really doing. I will say that Spencer Knight clip, the post-game interview last night, where he's like, I want to build this into a cup contending team. Like, I want to, like, it had Chicago fans fired up. I was reading the comments and the replies to it, and they're like, brings a tear to their eyes. Like, the Chicago fans are down bad. They have obviously got so much success in that early 2010s, and from a guy who's a fan of a team who's had literally 0 success in my lifetime, I would love that, and I would trade 10 years of depth and darkness for that, but they've been in a bad spot, and I still think they're going to be in a bad spot for the years to come.
I'll say, I think something interesting to note is those 3 teams that you listed there had all been to the Cups kind of in a 10-year span. And so I think, to Montreal's credit, they were the most recent team to get to the finals. And the fact that they've turned it around still as quick as they have versus like the Blackhawks, it's been quite some time now since those Patty Kane teams were there, and they're still on that bottom end of the rebuild. I think that's something that really stands out to me, where it's like the luxury that Habs fans have of getting to watch a team go all the way to the finals, and now they're on kind of like just about to kind of hit the peak of this rebuild. It's like Must be nice.
Well,
honestly.
they
That's where I'm thinking.
they exploded Montreal after they went to their finals. Like
Yeah.
their
was a bit of
goaltender,
a
their
fluke
franchise
final
defenseman, like
appearance.
it really played off in their favor that they had that run and then it just all fell apart.
Yeah.
Where Chicago like hung on for dear life. Vancouver, San Jose, like they were just like hanging on by a thread
Yeah.
to like the relics of old, basically.
And that's the thing that I want to mention with the Blackhawks, where I agree they're definitely third here, but they also went straight from the Taves Kane era to the first overall pick. Usually there's a couple years in between before you get that first overall pick where you're bad, but maybe not trying to be as bad as you are, where you get a top 5 or a top 10 pick to help supplement things once you get the first overall pick. And it's almost like they did that flipped where they immediately got Bedard after the Taves Kane era. So it's taking a little bit longer versus you look at San Jose where you had Will Smith there and then you get Celebrini and then you get a couple other pieces and then all of a sudden it looks a lot brighter. Or the Habs one where you mentioned they already have Caulfield, Suzuki in the system. So they're definitely the bottom of the bunch for me as well. But I think there's some circumstances there where maybe in a couple years when we see Levshinov take that Seth Jones role and we see Oliver Moore being the speedy guy in the lineup and Merrick Vanager and all these guys start coming in and maybe we view it in a different light, but I agree they're definitely 3 right now. The other thing I want to mention is I like the aggressiveness from Mike Greer in San Jose as well, where they trade up in the draft and that gives them an opportunity to get Sam Dickinson, who is by far their best defensive prospect, where they're aggressive in the summer and they go out and get that franchise number 1 in the future, Yaroslav Askarov, where it's not just some of the typical rebuilding pieces, where they've also gone out and been aggressive getting or helping them supplement the pieces that they already have. So I really like what Greer has done as a GM so far.
You got another one in the inbox for us? One
Yeah,
more?
let's get after it. Let's see what else we got here. So
We miss Kyle. He's back just in time for.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Hey.
It's nice to see no more John Hayden there either.
yeah,
John Hayes this
you
week.
guys toned it down this week.
Critics.
Ben V he submitted this question like months ago, but it's so big picture that I just got around to it recently. And this isn't actually his exact question because it was long and actually really well thought out. But he's a big Milwaukee expansion guy, and I'll read off the question here. So Milwaukee has a state-of-the-art arena. Wisconsin is a hockey hotbed. There's instant rivalries with the Blackhawks and Wild. Why isn't Milwaukee ever on a short list for future expansion in the NHL? And like when I first read this, I'm like, that's a good point. Like, why are they not at least in like sort of the top 5 or whatever? Reached out to Bill Daly, the deputy commissioner of the NHL, and he basically said, listen, we have no interest from people in Milwaukee right now. Like, there's interest groups in, I'm just going to say five cities. I'm not actually going to quote Bill Daly there. It's just me speculating. But Milwaukee is not one of those cities. So that's the first strike against expansion there. And I just think if you think about, and this is my opinion, if you think about the NHL and where they've expanded, I mean, there's a few things that they look for. One, I think that they target non-traditional markets. You see it in whatever, Nashville, Arizona, Vegas. Like, they've really gone away from arriving in places that already have a strong hockey culture, and we can debate all day about the merits of that, but that's just fact of the matter. And I see Milwaukee as a bit of a Quebec City of the States in terms of that hockey hotbed, relatively similar, population size. They already have an arena, but there's just sort of that like novelty missing, or that like that juice missing. So that's another thing. And also another note on the owner part, I think that the NHL is not in Utah without Ryan Smith. Like, I think as much as it was a market that they wanted to go to, Salt Lake City, I think Ryan Smith, the owner there, and him being this tech billionaire that has a ton of connections in Silicon Valley, him having a good reputation as the owner of the Utah Jazz, and just being deep pocketed, I think he was just such a strong choice there, a strong candidate to join the ownership group in the NHL. So you can't discount that, where they meet a certain person and they just they get on the same page right away. Okay, this is an owner we want to do business with. So there's that to latch onto and to consider with any of these markets as well. And just generally with expansion, like, let's face it, it's kind of a matter of when, not if. The NHL expands to 34 teams. If I were to put a few names out there, cities out there that I think are in strong contention, that are the front runners. I mean, it'd be Atlanta, it'd be Houston, it'd be Phoenix, and maybe even New Orleans. I think all of those are ahead of the the Milwaukees and the Kansas Cities and the Quebec cities of the world, because they check off more boxes in terms of being untapped markets and being whatever, not glorious markets, but I guess spicy markets. Like, you think of New Orleans, I mean,
that would be fun.
It's kind of like a mini Vegas in terms of like what you can do with events and just sort of, the tourism there. And
a very different market.
A very different market. And I just think that and I know this for a fact, Daly has said it previously, like, they look at the United States as a country where they only have 22 markets covered. So, they consider 5 teams in LA and New York as 2 markets, right? So they look at themselves as a 22-team market league in the US, whereas you look at the NFL, they've got 30. So they're looking at it as, we've got plenty of room to expand here. The US is a land of opportunity. So unfortunately, that probably means expansion to Canada is probably further down the line. But you kind of get where they're coming from, right?
Well, I do get this idea of, like, for Quebec City, people that live in Quebec City watch the NHL still.
Yes.
And they'll go to Montreal to see a hockey game once a year or something like that. People in Milwaukee and Wisconsin probably watch more NHL hockey than people in New Orleans. You put a team in New Orleans, there's probably more people watching your sport now than if you put a team in Milwaukee. I mean, that can be debated for sure about the merits of going to an already built-out spot, like as you're saying. But it does kind of click in my head of the appeal of going to these, like, fully. It's not just untapped because there's no hockey there. There's no hockey at all. Like, there's no hockey fans, so you'd be starting from scratch. And when you start from scratch, there's more room to grow.
The one thing I want to point out for Wisconsin is it's pretty unlikely they're going to get an NHL team. We'll get to it more in a second as well. I wonder about it as a PWHL market, though. Wisconsin is one of the elite women's hockey programs. There's a handful of players already in the league from Wisconsin, not even just from the Wisconsin program. It's probably not in the next wave or immediate wave of expansion, but I wonder about that as a market down the road, because women's hockey is such a big part of the Wisconsin Badgers program in terms of their sporting culture. I wonder about that as an option rather than an NHL potential expansion or anything like that. Obviously, Milwaukee has the AHL team there and such, but I wonder about a pro women's team in Wisconsin down the road in 15, 20 years' time.
Well, thank you for making my job way easier and giving me the perfect segue, because the score has now just introduced the PWHL into being fully tracked in the app, which is awesome. And I know the PW is getting into a pretty intense season here in March. Kyle, what are you watching here?
Yeah, it's a busy month leading up to the World Championship, a big part of the schedule before they break for the Worlds in April. So there's a lot of big headlines to watch this upcoming month. The first thing is the tight battle for the playoffs. Right now, the second seed, the last home playoffs in the semifinals, and the 5th seed out of the playoffs is separated by 5 points. And in a 3-point system where a regulation win is worth 3 points, that's not even 2 full regulation wins between home ice advantage in the playoffs and not even making the playoffs. So it is extremely tight there. And the big battle that you're watching for right now is the Ottawa Charge, who are looking to make the playoffs for the first time, and the defending champions, who are currently the number 4 seed right now, just separated by 2 points, where Minnesota started the season strong, maybe trending down, versus Ottawa, who has really started to ramp things up. And actually, Ottawa put up an 8th spot against Minnesota not too long ago, the PWHL record for single game goals. So that's a big battle to watch here going forwards. The other big thing in March, as I mentioned here, is going into the World Championships, where this is the last stretch for players, and whether it be health or performance or whatever it is, to make their case to make the World Championships for the Canadian American rosters, where there's the real big battles. This is the last World Championships before the Olympics next year, so it's the last showcase for that as well. And there's 2 players in particular that have the performance that I really want to key in on, where Toronto Scepters forward Jessie Comfort has literally tripled her scoring from last season. She had 5 points in 24 games last season. She has 15 points in 21 games so far this season, 8 goals compared to 1 last season. She was at the Olympics in 2022, at the World Championships in 2022. She hasn't played at the last 2 World Championships, though, for the Americans. I wonder if she gets into the roster. She's still only 25 years old, very young player. I think she can make her way onto the World Championship roster for the Americans. And Michaela Cava is a player for Canada that has never played for Canada at any level, but she has 8 goals right now this season, tied for 4th in the league. And the crazy stat for her, she's won 4 straight league championships across 4 different leagues in Sweden, Russia, the PHF, obviously, which folded into the PWHL, and then won the league last year in the PWHL. And out of those 4, she's won league MVP twice.
So not a Pat Maroon.
No, not a Pat Maroon
winner.
situation. She is a big game player, and she has a performance in the regular season now. I wonder if she can make a depth run for Team Canada this upcoming World Championships. And then the last thing, of course, we just mentioned it here, is the expansion wildcard, where you look a couple weeks ago, PWHL staff mentioned they're looking at a 4 to 6 week timeline to kind of figure out their expansion plans. Well, you look 4 to 6 weeks from 2 weeks ago, and we're looking at March or maybe early April to figure out what those expansion plans are. There's been a lot of great takeover tour games. You look at Vancouver selling out, Edmonton selling out, Denver setting an American record, and then there's obviously a bunch of the other wild cards. So I wonder if we see expansion details kind of start to be finalized here in these next 4 to 6 weeks, and then that's going to be a big factor going into the summer and obviously into next season, actually figuring out how many teams are going to be in the season next year. So those are the big headlines that I'm watching for in March here, which of course is a very exciting thing with the Score having PWHL schedules, stats, everything like that. There's a great feature from a couple of our writers on the PWHL expansion process, which you can read on the Score app. So it's a very exciting time, obviously for the schedule in March, but also for the Score and the PWHL as well.
Now, Kyle, with the Worlds coming up, we saw the 4 nations, like Canada versus U.S. is an incredible rivalry. It really starts, though, with the women's game. How would you size up that? Like, it's not starting tomorrow, but like when you think on paper, like who's the favorite of those two?
The favorite right now, I think you lean Canada, where they've had the success at the major tournaments, and they just won the rivalry series as well in what was a very tightly contested battle. But the American team is this younger group that has a lot of NCAA players. We didn't see those at the last rivalry series, which is a big factor there as well. And that young group just continues to gain experience, continues to play at these World Championships, and continues to get better. Like Caroline Harvey is still in the NCAA at Wisconsin, actually. She has not played a pro game yet. She's already been a best defender at the World Championships twice, might be the best defender, period, in women's hockey, and she's like 22 years old. So that's a player that wasn't at the rivalry series most recently that is going to play huge minutes for Team USA. So it is extremely close. It's going to be a lot of fun. The World Championships are over in Czechia this year for the first time. That's a big team that has been taking a lot of steps, so it's going to be fun seeing the Team Canada, Team USA rivalry go over in the World Championships. And the rivalry series is its own thing, but it always takes a step up at the World Championships in the round robin, and then we typically see them play for gold as well. But right now I give the edge to Team Canada because the veteran leadership, the veteran group has had the success over the last couple of major tournaments.
That's fun stuff, exciting things ahead for the PW, and I'm eager to see how that sizes up, extending Canada USA. I need more of it. Everything I can get right now. Gonna push into the final part of our show, which is, as always, top shelf trivia. Levi, before I hand you the reins, since Kyle left, I've been cooking, but I haven't gone.
Had to mention.
I had to mention.
He's a head-to-head merchant.
Now I'm a head-to-head merchant. Now that there's more competition, we'll see if I can keep it going. But Levi, you can take us away, man.
Yeah, I'll say it didn't make the inbox list, but I might have submitted a note to John there saying, like, when is Aidan gonna lose now?
Didn't make the cut.
Didn't make the cut. Maybe if you lose today, we'll see something next week. But no, yeah, we're finally back to a free-for-all 3-guy trivia here. You did win it last week, correct?
Oh yeah, you know what?
So
Come on.
Get the
there you
chain
go.
on.
It
Come
is right there
on.
for you, so you might as well throw it on.
Keep it warm for me, eh?
Yeah. But yeah, actually, I've got leaderboard here. It is up to date. So as you can see, tight race now. Aidan has tied John.
Wow.
Kyle/Josh still in first. I won't discredit Josh.
But
for what
Josh
he's
has
done.
got like 3 wins though, so it's
Kyle/Josh.
It's a franchise.
Josh
Yeah.
has
It's a
actually
franchise.
just every time he's come on the show, he's just taken.
He's
guys.
great.
Yeah, he's
So
got a
great.
deep knowledge.
He's the best.
Sneaky.
Yeah, but I'm sticking with the same theme. Obviously, trade deadline is still coming up. So not exactly as trade-oriented as the last trivia, but I needed to do something kind of that revolved around players moving. And so what better to do than a little bit of career path trivia.
Ooh,
One of my favorite styles of trivia, honestly, to ever do. So we've got 7 players here. You guys have the buzzers for today. First one to look at it, first one to get it and buzz in. I'll give you the nod of approval. You give me the guy, and we'll award points. I will say all active players.
Okay.
Makes
Okay.
things a little bit
Okay.
easier for you. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into it with player number 1. Here we go. Colorado.
Who was that?
I guess.
Give it to the champ.
There was one that went off first. Honestly, right after I said all award.
It's
whoever
probably
did it
Aidan.
first.
That was me. And this is Matt Duchesne.
Matt Duchesne's correct.
That was mine.
Nice.
Matt Duchesne's correct. A little bit of a feeler here just to kind of get you guys warm, but Matt Duchesne is correct. 1 point for Aidan. On to the next player. I think that was Kyle.
Yeah, I think.
Brandon Montour.
Brandon Montour is correct. Nicely
I
done.
always
People-
forget he started in
I was
Anaheim.
gonna say,
Yeah,
people- even-
that was the tricky part.
Yeah, even the Sabres, because he was playing forward over on the Sabres. It was a bit
There
of
was
an
some crazy
interesting
stuff
start.
going on.
Florida saw something that Buffalo obviously didn't. 1-1-0. On to player number 3.
Jonathan Marchessault.
Jonathan
Oh,
Marchessault.
the Blue Jackets.
Very nicely done.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This-
did not know he was a Jack.
I found Jonathan
UDFA
Marchessault.
Columbus Blue Jackets.
I think
yeah.
he played 5 games maybe with the Jackets. I couldn't believe it though. I saw this and I was like, oh, I have to include this. I did not. That's literally, I would have never guessed that.
That's
So,
a good one.
2 for Kyle, 1 for Aidan, and a bagel for John. Player number 4.
I just got to get in here.
Wow.
Okay, we got Montreal.
Oh,
Carolina,
just
Washington.
buzzed in. That's
Interesting.
So someone on
strategy.
Toronto. Wow, this is wrong. But Max Domi. I know it's wrong, but
Max Domi
I got to be faster.
is
so.
wrong. Kyle's in on the next one.
Did you buzz or?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I
Just
didn't
raised
buzz
his
it.
Max
hand.
Pacioretty.
Max Pacioretty's
Yep.
correct. Might forget because he's
The Carolina Washington really is
crazy
weird.
part
Yeah.
of his career there.
Gosh, Kyle wins it with one more here.
Yes, Kyle does win it with 1 more. That's 3 for Kyle. On to player number 5.
Double
I don't
LA.
even know.
Oh.
Darcy Kemper.
Nice
Darcy
Oh, that's a
Kemper's
good
correct. Darcy Kemper's
So-
correct. I had to slip
The
a
double
goalie.
LA is how I got
Yeah,
that.
Look at
yeah. I
that.
had to slip a goalie
Get him
into
back
here,
in
but
and he just comes and steals the chain.
that's how it's
instantly.
done, man. That's how it's done. 4-1 zip for Kyle.
Yeah,
so I
let's
mean,
finish him off.
Yeah,
too.
let's
Yeah.
finish him
yeah.
off.
Run up the score a little
Let's
bit.
see if you guys can get a couple here.
Aidan's in.
Zadorov.
Ooh,
It is
that's a
Zadorov.
good one.
Very
Nice,
nicely done. I
nice.
thought that might be tricky, although.
I forgot about Chicago
Does the
there.
Does the Flames help you there?
Yeah, Flames helped, and
Yeah.
he was. I remember he came from Chicago to Calgary, and Eric Francis asked him a question, being like, "How are you gonna play like top 6 minutes on a contending team?" He was like, "Oh, I was playing top 2 minutes in Chicago." And Eric Francis got
Classic.
for it. I don't know. I just have this weird memory. That's how I
Zadorov's a
remember he
good
came from
quote.
Chicago.
There you go. All right, last player on the board. Let's see if John can get on the board here. Maybe we got a longer one.
Oh my god.
Ooh.
Is I don't know. Wow. Who even plays in New York anymore? I don't.
This is a busy one.
Wow. I was thinking the longer one might be easier just because you can tell,
Yeah.
kind of follow where he's been at, but
lot of
It's
stops
overwhelming.
here.
There's so much information
Mhm.
going
there's
on.
a lot of guys here. I think this is I think he's tied for the most teams played on amongst current players.
Yeah,
Ooh.
that's a bunch of teams. I don't know it. Do you guys know it?
No, I don't got a.
Mike Riley.
Mike Riley is incorrect.
That's a good guess.
That is a
That's
good guess.
All right.
Anything from you
Hit
guys?
us. Yeah, hit us.
You'll
with it.
throw in the towel?
Yeah.
This is he's been honestly pretty solid throughout his career. Anthony Duclair.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Anthony Duclair.
wow, yeah.
Had me
I
double-
totally
want
forgot,
to give him
yeah.
more than a 1-year deal.
No,
so-
exactly. But he's
Actually, did
honestly
the Islanders
he's
give him
been
more than a 1-year deal?
serviceable.
I think so, yeah.
Well, there you go, Kyle.
I think he just got healthy scratch recently.
Ooh, so maybe
Ugh.
he might be on a.
We might be adding another team there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's
But-
wild. But
Standard Kyle, man, comes back and wins.
I was a little bit nervous coming back, but the trivia Jonathan Marchessault really helped.
that
me.
was a big,
That
a
was
big
good.
one
Yeah,
for you
yeah.
there, John. You did
I'm
finish
ashamed.
your donut, but you were so close for the Duchesne one. You would have had the Duchesne.
Yeah.
So.
That would have set me on the right path, and here we are.
Well, I'm curious how many of those guys, maybe if we see any of those guys move at the deadline. Could we see a Duclair on a team?
There you
I
go.
feel like there's going to be so
Maybe.
many sneaky moves. There's always so many
There
sneaky
always
ones.
is.
And,
I hope we get another surprise like Thomas Hertl.
Oh, wouldn't that be awesome?
That'd be fun.
Who would be your biggest surprise player at the deadline? Quick around the horn. Don't even think too much about it. Oh, I
I think John Gibson.
Yeah.
Like, it's a complicated deal, but like maybe there's a way the Oilers or Carolina figures it out.
Anyone?
Jared McCann's the one for me still, where He's been out there a little bit, but I think a lot of people still would be surprised if somebody's able to pry him out of Seattle.
Okay.
I'll go big. I think Elias Pettersson. I
Okay.
want to see him
Alright.
move.
Okay.
Who's
I wanna
taking
see
that
it.
contract?
Big
Elias
shooter.
Pettersson for a bag of chips, maybe. Is
Yeah,
what we'll
seriously.
see.
I want to see it happen.
I would love to see an Eric Carlson deal. I just want to
Yes.
see that guy. See
I really
how he
hope
just
so.
collect more jerseys with his name.
I was
on it,
actually hoping he
basically.
would end up in Florida.
Yeah, well, hey, probably not after Seth Jones, but
No.
wouldn't put it past him. So you, know,
You
you
know, that's
never
a great
know.
point.
You never know. And we will be here to break down all of those deadline deals that happen later on this week, next week on Top Shelf. But that's all the time we got for this episode here. From all of us here at Top Shelf and our friends over at Skyscanner, we will see you next time.